Welcome to Reformed Thinking. It's really good to have you with us again as we open up some pretty heavy texts and try to make sense of the Christian life. Today, we are going to try and dismantle a picture that I think most of us, and I mean even those of us who've been in the church for decades, have carried around in our heads for a long time. It's that mental image of the missionary as a spiritual superhero.
Yeah, the solitary figure on the ridgeline looking out over a lost continent.
Right. The absolute giant of the faith.
Yeah.
We imagine them, battling darkness, preaching to thousands in some jungle clearing, planting 3 churches before breakfast.
And never breaking a sweat.
Exactly. Never breaking a sweat. We tend to think their primary qualification is their seminary degree or maybe their linguistic ability, to speak fluent Mandarin or Swahili, or just their sheer raw boldness. But the source material we are looking at today argues that we've completely missed the mark.
We've missed it by a very wide margin.
What if I told you that the primary qualification for a missionary and the primary tool for their ministry is not happening on a stage or a street corner or even in a pulpit?
It's happening at the dinner table.
It's happening within the 4 walls of their own home. We're doing a deep dive today into a really fascinating text titled Biblical Missions: Principles, Priorities, and Practices. We're specifically focusing on the contributions from Mark Tatlock, Chris Burnett, and others, all about the missionary family. And the central tension we really need to unpack is this. We often treat the missionary family as just the support system for the real work. The wife and kids are just the baggage train for the husband's ministry.
Which is just a tragic reductionism, a tragic way to see it.
But this text argues that the family is the front line of the gospel demonstration.
It's a massive shift in perspective, and since we're framing this through Reformed thinking, we have to start with the text. We always have to start with the text.
Always.
If you look at the Great Commission in Matthew 28, we often rush to the go and make disciples part. We love the action verbs. But from a Reformed theological perspective, we have to look at the whole counsel of God. You just can't separate the command to go from the qualifications of the one who is going.
And those qualifications are found where?
Primarily in the pastoral epistles. So 1 Timothy 3 and Titus 1. Paul is incredibly clear here. When he's laying out the qualifications for an elder, which is the biblical standard for a missionary pastor, he asks this rhetorical question in verse 5. If a man does not know how to manage his own household, how will he take care of the church of God?
It's a rhetorical question, but it has a terrifying answer.
The answer is, he can't. It's an impossibility.
So the mission of this deep dive is to understand that connection. We're not just talking about parenting tips for expats. We are looking at the biblical necessity of order in the home, how marriage and parenting are actually evangelistic tools, and we have a really gripping case study on cultural battles in Colombia. Plus, we'll look at the gritty reality of the struggles these families face.
And we really need to be honest about those struggles. We do no one any favors by pretending they don't exist.
Absolutely not. So let's get right into the theological foundation. One of the contributors, Mark Borisuk, he introduces this concept of congruity. It sounds a bit technical. Break that down for us. What's he actually saying?
Yeah, it does sound a bit academic, but the idea is actually pretty simple. Congruity is essentially the state of being in harmony or agreement. It just means the pieces fit together.
Okay.
So Borisuk is arguing that there cannot be a disconnect or an incongruity between the disciple-making a man does outside his home and the disciple-making he does inside his home.
So you can't be Dr. Jekyll in the pulpit and Mr. Hyde at the breakfast table.
Precisely. You cannot be a great evangelist to the nations and a stranger to your own children. Borisuk argues that faithfulness in the home is a prerequisite. It is not an optional bonus for the super spiritual.
That's the entry ticket.
That's a great way to put it. It is the entry ticket. If you fail at the first level of discipleship, your wife and your children, you are disqualified from the second level, which is the church and the lost.
That really challenges the idea that ministry is what happens when you leave the house. I think a lot of guys, especially, driven type A guys, view the home as the place they go to recharge so they can go do the real work.
And that is a fatal error. The home is not the refueling station, it's the proving ground. He points to 1 Timothy 3.4-5 and Titus 1.6, as we just mentioned. But what makes this argument so compelling in the text is the discussion on order versus confusion. This takes us to the very nature of God himself.
1 Corinthians 14.33.
For God is not a God of confusion, but of peace, In contrast, you have James 3.16, which tells us that where jealousy and selfish ambition exist, there is disorder and every evil thing.
So the default is chaos.
The default is chaos. We live in a sin-cursed world, and because of the fall, the natural trajectory of everything, relationships, institutions, families, is toward chaos.
It's like spiritual entropy. If you leave it alone, it just falls apart.
That is exactly right. And the argument here is that God designed specific roles in the family, husband, wife, children, specifically to bring stability and order to that chaos. And this brings glory to him because it reflects his nature. A chaotic home lies about God's character. An ordered home speaks the truth about who God is.
But here's the kicker, and this is something Borisuk notes that I think every aspiring missionary, and honestly, every Christian needs to hear. He says that going to the mission field does not fix your family problems. In fact, he uses a very specific analogy. He says the mission field functions like fertilizer for sin.
It is such a vivid image, isn't it?
It is, because usually we think of the mission field as this sanctifying place. You think, oh, we'll move to a new country, we'll be serving God 24/7, we'll be sacrificing, and all our petty arguments will just vanish because we're on a holy mission.
We romanticize the geography. We think a change in longitude changes the heart. But Borisuk says no. The pressure of the culture, the language barrier, the isolation, the spiritual warfare, it is like pouring miracle grow on your character flaws.
So if you have a little weed of impatience in America.
In the mission field, that weed becomes a redwood tree. If there are cracks in the foundation of your marriage in your home country, they will become canyons on the mission field. The sinful nature chafes against God's defined rules naturally. So if a husband is prone to passivity, just checking out and letting his wife run things, the stress of the field will make him withdraw even further. If a wife is prone to usurping authority or being anxious, the field will amplify that anxiety to a breaking point.
That's why the so what here is so critical. The distinct roles in the family are designed by God to display his glory to a watching world. If the family is in chaos, the message of the gospel is obscured. You can preach Jesus brings peace, but if your home is a war zone, nobody's listening.
The medium is the message. You cannot preach order from a platform of chaos.
Let's talk about those roles, because the source material gets very specific about the missionary marriage as a living picture. It breaks it down into the husband's role and the wife's role. And I want to start with the husband, because the text uses words like leadership and headship, which, well, they can be trigger words in our modern culture.
They can be. We are allergic to authority in the West, but we have to look at how Scripture defines them, not how modern culture caricatures them. The text points to Ephesians 5.2533. And headship is not defined as tyranny. It's not being the boss who barks orders from the recliner.
Get me a sandwich, woman, that kind of thing.
No, that is a complete distortion. Biblical headship is defined as leading by loving and serving. The standard is incredibly high. The husband must emulate Christ, giving himself up for the church.
So it's the opposite of a power trip. It's a death sentence to your own ego.
That is a good way to put it. Think about the sacrifice involved in moving to the field. Often the husband is the one driving the vision. He feels the call. He says, God has called us to this unreached people group. But the text highlights that this often requires him to sacrifice his own professional goals or maybe even other ministry desires to ensure his wife finds fulfillment there.
That is a key nuance. Because he might be fulfilled. He's out preaching and doing the work. He's the hero in his own story. But if she's at home struggling with the language, feeling isolated, and dealing with plumbing that doesn't work, he is failing.
If he is winning at ministry but his wife is withering, he is losing. And that connects to 1 Peter 3.7, which is a verse that should make every husband tremble.
Oh, yeah?
It says, husbands must live with their wives in an understanding way, showing honor to them as the weaker vessel, meaning usually physically weaker or more vulnerable in that context, since they're heirs with you the grace of life. And then comes the consequence.
So that your prayers will not be hindered.
Let's just sit with that for a second. That is terrifying.
It really is. I mean, we talk about spiritual warfare a lot in missions. We talk about binding spirits and praying for breakthroughs.
But the implication here is that if a missionary's marriage is out of order, if he's not loving, honoring, and understanding his wife, his communication with God is blocked.
Imagine being on the front lines. You're in a hostile region. You're engaging in spiritual warfare, trying to reach a localized people group. And your supply line to headquarters is cut off. Not because of the enemy, but because you were harsh with your wife at breakfast.
It renders the missionary powerless. A hindered fellowship with his wife results in a hindered fellowship with God. You cannot bypass the second greatest commandment to love your neighbor and your wife is your nearest neighbor to fulfill the Great Commission.
Okay, now let's look at the wife's role. The text references Ephesians 5 and 1 Peter 3 regarding submission. And again, we need to define this carefully because submission is another one of those words that makes people bristle.
Yes, and again, we have to define this biblically, not culturally. The source describes submission as a blessed position that fits God's design. It's not about inferiority. It's not about silence. It is about function and order. It pictures the church's submission to Christ.
So when a missionary wife honors her husband and follows his lead, she is preaching a sermon.
She is visualizing the theology. She is showing the world how the church relates to Jesus. If she is constantly undermining him, mocking him, or fighting for control, she is preaching a false gospel that the church rebels against Christ.
And this is not just theoretical theology. We have a case study in the text that proves how powerful this is, the story of Victor. This was one of the most moving parts of the source material for me.
It is a beautiful story. Victor was a Chinese man. He was an atheist, deeply rooted in the communist system, and he was antagonistic toward religion. He had been educated to believe that religion was the opium of the masses, just a crutch for the weak and uneducated.
So he was not looking for God. He wasn't walking into a church asking, how do I get saved?
Not at all. He was deeply skeptical. But he started attending a Bible study led by the author, Mark Borisuk. And do you know what broke down his walls? It wasn't some ontological argument for the existence of God. It wasn't archaeological evidence for the resurrection.
It was the aroma.
The aroma of marital love. Victor grew up in a home where his parents fought constantly. It was a chaotic, angry environment. He believed marriage was, as he put it, the graveyard of love. He thought that once you get married, happiness just dies.
Wow, that's a cynical worldview.
It is, but it was his reality. But when he spent time in the missionary's home, he saw something that did not fit his worldview. He saw a husband and wife who genuinely loved each other. He saw a husband serving his wife. He saw children who were respectful and happy, not just compliant out of fear.
That is incredible. He was just watching the family interactions, and that was the apologetic.
It was. He said later, I saw parents who didn't fight constantly and children who were respectful. The imperfect but faithful family was the evidence that this God they talked about actually made a difference in real life. It opened the door for the gospel. He realized, if their God can do this, if he can bring peace where I only know war, then maybe he is real.
It really validates the premise of this whole deep dive. The home is the front line. The sermon wasn't the words Borisuk spoke. It was the life he lived in his living room.
Which is why the order we discussed earlier is so vital. Chaos pushes people away. Divine order draws them in.
Speaking of the living room, let's transition to parenting on the field. Because if marriage is the picture of Christ in the church, parenting is often the picture of the father and his children. And the text suggests that parenting on the mission field is, well, it's complicated.
To say the least. Just like with marriage, the move to a foreign culture puts immense pressure on parenting. The text cites Proverbs 22.15, folly is bound up in the heart of a child.
Which means, again, moving to a new country does not change the kid's heart.
Right. There's this myth that missionary kids, MKs, are automatically little angels. But a change in geography does not equal a change in nature. If a child is rebellious in America, they will be rebellious in Asia or Africa, perhaps even more so because of the stress.
The stress of transition, losing their friends, different food, a different language.
And the source material emphasizes that discipline is evangelistic.
Yeah.
This is a key insight.
How so? I think we often think of discipline as just behavior modification. Stop hitting your sister or be quiet while daddy is on a Zoom call.
That's a secular view of discipline. It's about convenience and compliance. A biblical view, according to the source, connects discipline directly to the gospel. First, the text reminds us that a man is disqualified from ministry if he is pugnacious or prone to anger. That's from 1 Timothy 3.3. So discipline can never be done in anger.
That is a high bar, especially when you're jet-lagged and stressed.
It is the highest bar. But the methodology is this. Discipline followed by instruction. That's from Ephesians 6.4. You discipline the child to show them the seriousness of sin, that actions have consequences, but then you instruct them. You show them that they cannot meet God's holy standard on their own.
So you don't just say, be better. You say, you sinned and you can't fix it yourself.
Exactly. You point out their inability. You hit your sister because there is anger in your heart and you can't scrub that spot out. And that points them to the only one who can, Jesus. 2 Corinthians 5.21. The cycle of discipline and instruction is meant to lead the child to the cross. It shows them their need for a savior. That is why parenting is evangelism. Every time you discipline, you are preaching the gospel to your child.
So it's not just about managing behavior so the missionary doesn't look bad. It's about saving the child's soul.
Precisely. And the source also talks about the importance of preparation and unity before even leaving for the field. It's not just the parents dragging the kids along on an adventure they didn't ask for.
No, the whole family needs to be on the same page. Borisuk talks about involving the children in prayer, learning the language together.
And this is crucial, having fun.
Fun seems so frivolous when you're talking about saving souls.
It's not frivolous, it's essential for survival. He mentions biking to the Olympic Park in Beijing as a family. You have to build that bond. You have to create memories that are positive so the child doesn't just remember the mission field as a place of deprivation and duty.
And including them in the ministry, right? Not just parking them in front of a screen while the adults talk.
Yes. His daughters worked at a local fruit stand to build relationships. They played games with the Bible study students. When the children see themselves as participants in the mission, rather than victims of their parents' calling, it changes everything. They become fellow workers.
That brings us to a very different context. We've been talking a bit about China with Victor, but the source material shifts gears to a section by Santiago Armel about Colombia. And this is where we see the family engaged in what I would call cultural warfare.
This is a gripping section. Armel paints a vivid picture of the context in Colombia. He talks about the spiritual awakening there, which is beautiful, the church is growing, but he contrasts it with the dark history of the narco culture.
The statistics are staggering. I have them here. 504,100 acres of coca leaf in 2021 and 1,400 metric tons of cocaine produced. That is an industrial scale of vice.
It is, and that level of drug production creates a culture. It is not just an economic statistic, it shapes the soul of a nation. He calls it the narco culture. It produces a society obsessed with easy money, debauched lifestyles, and viewing women as trophies. It's a culture where the wisest person, the vivo, is the one who can skirt the law, cheat the system, and get rich quick.
So if you're a Christian family living in the middle of that, you're swimming upstream against a raging river. How do you survive and minister in that environment?
Armel outlines 3 specific fronts where the family has to fight. This is where the rubber meets the road.
Let's go through them.
The first front is corruption and lies. In that culture, there's a norm that says if you can evade the fare on public transport, you're smart. If you can cheat on your taxes or bribe a policeman, you're wise.
It's institutionalized dishonesty.
Exactly. So the biblical counterstrike is a radical commitment to truth. The missionary father must keep his word no matter how small. If he says he'll be somewhere at 2:00 p.m., he is there at 2:00 p.m. If he owes a penny, he pays the penny. This reflects God, who is truth. In a culture of lies, a man of integrity stands out like a lighthouse. It confuses people, and then it intrigues them.
Why did you pay that fare? Nobody was watching.
Because my God watches. It is a powerful testimony.
The second front he mentions is physical vanity. And this was eye-opening. I didn't realize Colombia was such a hub for this.
Oh, it's massive. Medical tourism and plastic surgery are huge industries there, specifically in cities like Medellin and Cali. The narco aesthetic has created this pressure on women to meet very specific, voluptuous standards. It's a culture that worships the body.
So the missionary family has to fight that, especially if they have daughters.
They fight it by valuing the imago Dei, the image of God and inner beauty, as 1 Peter 3 describes. The missionary couple has to have hard conversations. Are we inadvertently promoting vanity? How do we talk about bodies? Are we showing that we value godliness over appearance? Because the culture is screaming the opposite at their children every day. Your value is your shape. The home must be the place where they hear the truth. Your value is your creator.
And the third front is covetousness, or easy money.
The new rich mentality. Everyone wants the narco lifestyle wealth without work. The lucky break.
It reminds me of the prosperity gospel, actually.
There is a lot of overlap. The biblical counter is industry and hard work. The pastor must show that ministry is actually work. It's not a scam. He labors in preaching. He labors in counseling. He shows that work is a blessing from God, a creation mandate, not a curse to be avoided by finding a bag of cash. He models 1 Thessalonians 2, working with his hands so as not to be a burden.
It really shows that the family lifestyle is a theological statement. In China, the ordered, loving home refutes the idea that religion is for the weak. In Colombia, the honest, hardworking, modest family refutes the narco-culture of vanity and corruption.
That is the synthesis of this entire deep dive. The family is not just living in the culture, they are living against the sinful patterns of the culture to show a better way. They are a counterculture of the kingdom.
But doing that is hard, and it takes a toll. We can't paint a rosy picture here and pretend that if you just have good theology, you won't suffer.
Yeah.
The source material includes a report from Chris Burnett based on a meeting of regional directors in March 2023. This is the real-world struggle section.
This is where we get gritty. These directors oversee hundreds of families across the globe. They know where the bodies are buried, so to speak. They identify the top stress points, and marriage struggles were at the very top of the list.
And specifically, unspoken problems.
That is the danger. Think about the isolation. Who do you talk to? If you are the missionary, you're supposed to be the spiritual giant. You can't tell your supporters back home, hey, we are on the brink of divorce because you might lose your funding.
It's the pedestal trap.
Right. And you can't tell the locals because you're supposed to be mentoring them. You can't bleed in front of the sheep.
So you suffer in silence.
Often, yes. The report highlights the desperate need for older female mentors for young wives and accountability for husbands. And then there's workaholism. Because the needs are so great, people are dying without Christ, the husband feels justified in neglecting his family. I'm doing the Lord's work, he says.
That sounds so noble.
But it is a deception. The text cites 1 Timothy 5:8. If you fail to provide for your own household, you have denied the faith and are worse than an unbeliever.
Right.
And providing is not just money. It's not just putting rice on the table. It is emotional presence. It is spiritual leadership. If you win the city but lose your children, you have failed the biblical mandate.
They also talked about children's struggles, and I appreciated the distinction they made between sin and developmental disorders.
That is a crucial distinction. In the past, maybe the church was too quick to label everything as rebellion. But learning disabilities, dyslexia, ADHD, autism are not sin. They are physical, neurological realities.
But on the mission field, you don't have the IEPs. You don't have the specialists.
You often lack the resources completely. You're in a village where they don't even have a word for autism. Parents are left to handle complex developmental issues largely on their own, often while homeschooling. It is an immense pressure cooker.
And then there's the issue of aging parents. This one hits hard for anyone living away from home, but for a missionary, it's compounded.
The guilt is real. You're in South America, and your mom in Ohio is getting dementia. Your siblings are there taking care of her, changing the diapers, driving her to appointments, and they start to resent you.
Why are you playing hero overseas while we're doing the dirty work here?
Exactly. You're out there saving the world, and we're here saving mom. It creates family rifts.
And biblically, we're called to honor our parents. That doesn't stop when you get a visa.
It does not. The text suggests a very practical solution: flexibility in funding. Mission agencies are starting to increase budgets to help missionaries care for their parents financially or to allow for more frequent travel back home. It is a recognition that the command to honor your father and mother is binding, even across oceans.
One of the most modern struggles they mentioned was isolation, specifically the virtual world trap. This is something missionaries 50 years ago did not deal with.
No, this is a new phenomenon. 20 years ago, if you went to the field, you were there. You waited 3 weeks for a letter. Now you can spend 6 hours a day on Zoom with people back home. You can live your whole life on a screen.
The expat bubble.
Exactly. You go to an international church, your kids go to an international school, you talk to your mom on FaceTime every night, and you watch Netflix in English. You can live in a country for 10 years and never really touch the local culture.
You're physically in Bangkok, but digitally in Boston.
And the directors warned that this is a major danger. It prevents deep acculturation. It prevents language fluency. You have to cut the cord and engage the people you are called to serve. You have to be willing to be uncomfortable and disconnected from your home culture to truly incarnate into the new one.
So we've laid out the theology, the roles, the cultural battles, and the struggles. It's a heavy load.
Yeah.
Now, what does the sending church, the people listening to this who might be back home in the suburbs, do? Lauren Brown contributes a section on the support system.
And she grounds it in 3 John 6-8, which talks about supporting those who go out for the sake of the name. It says we ought to support such people so that we may be fellow workers for the truth.
I love that phrase, fellow workers. Even if you stay, you're working with them by supporting them.
Exactly. She also mentions Phoebe in Romans 16, a woman who was a courier and servant who needed support from the church in Rome.
The key principle she mentions is God causes the growth from 1 Corinthians 3. Why is that relevant to support?
It relieves the pressure. Missionaries can feel immense pressure to produce results to justify their support letters. We saved 50 souls this month.
Return on investment.
Right. It becomes a sales pitch. When the send-in church reminds them, hey, God causes the growth, you just be faithful. We support you for your faithfulness, not just your numbers. It's a huge weight off their shoulders. It allows them to focus on the work rather than the marketing.
She gives some very practical tactics for women caring for women. And the first one is simply time.
Listening is ministry. We tend to think we need to offer profound advice. We want to fix it. But often, the missionary wife just needs someone to listen to her vent about the cockroaches, the heat, the corrupt police, and the loneliness without judging her and without giving her 3 Bible verses to fix her attitude.
Yeah, bearing the burden with her.
Exactly.
And how we pray matters too. She talks about moving from the generic, I'll pray for you, to using prayer journals.
Yes, tracking specific requests and then tracking the answers. It validates the missionary's struggle. When you can call them and say, hey, I've been praying about that visa issue you mentioned 3 weeks ago, or that conflict with your neighbor, how is it going? That tells them they are not forgotten. It tells them their life matters to you.
And I love the idea of video calls that normalize their life.
Right. Don't just talk about the ministry stats. Ask to see the kitchen window. Ask to see the kids' rooms. Show me what you're cooking. It grounds the relationship in reality. It reminds you that they are real people living in a real place, not just disembodied spirits doing ministry.
And finally, caring for the MKS, the missionary kids.
They're the third culture kids. They don't fully fit in the host country, but they don't fit in back home either. They're in between. Brown suggests setting up video groups for teens, ages 11 and up, to connect with peers, sending birthday cards directly to the kids, making them feel seen. Because often, they feel like invisible baggage attached to their parents' calling.
It's so practical and yet so vital. So let's bring this all together. We've covered a lot of ground today.
We have.
If we had to synthesize the main argument of this deep dive, it is that the missionary family is a theological statement. Whether they're in China facing atheism or Colombia facing narco-culture, the ordered, loving, biblically structured home is a light in the darkness.
Absolutely. And I want to apply this to our listeners who are not missionaries. This reformed thinking is not just for the mission field. Every Christian home is a mission field in microcosm.
That is the conviction, isn't it?
The requirements for the elder in 1 Timothy 3, managing the household well, are not just for elders and missionaries. They are the pattern for Christian maturity. If your home is full of chaos, anger, and disorder, you hinder your witness to your neighbors just as much as a missionary hinders their witness to the nations.
You can't export what you don't have.
Exactly.
So as we wrap up, I want to leave the listeners with a final thought to chew on.
Here's the question I would pose, based on everything we've discussed. If we believe that the family is God's primary illustration of the gospel, the picture of Christ in the church, is it possible that the greatest hindrance to global missions today is not a lack of funding? Is it possible it's not closed borders or hostile governments? What is it then? Is it possible that the greatest hindrance is a lack of ordered, holy marriages in our sending churches? Because we can only export what we are. If our churches are full of broken, chaotic families, then that is what we will export to the nations. And if we can't export healthy families, what are we actually exporting?
That is a sobering thought. We're not just sending individuals, we're sending a culture. We're sending a theology of the home.
Precisely. So the work of missions starts in your living room tonight.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into biblical missions. We hope this challenges you to look at your own home, whether you are in the suburbs or the jungle, as the primary place where the gospel is demonstrated.
Soli Deo Gloria.
Until next time, keep thinking.